once again, it's time to go at the CBC. It seems to be the gift that keeps on giving, or the gift that keeps on taking. Kind of hard to know. I'm here with my colleague and friend Lorrie Goldstein to discuss the latest announcement, rumors perhaps out of the Liberal government on what they're going to do with the CBC. You tweeted on this this week, Lorrie. Just what's in the work.
Well, look, the CBC gets right now about over $1 billion a year. What about 1.4 billion? And they get about 400 million in advertising. And so what it looks like the Trudeau government is talking about is, well, look, let's eliminate that they have any need for advertising. So let's give them, and it's already in their election campaign, let's give them $400 million to sort of free them up from advertising so they can become more unlike the other networks. All of which, of course, to me, avoids the main point, which is that we have a state-funded broadcaster with a very clear political view about which party it favors in power. And to me, that needs to be constrained. You don't give it more money so it doesn't have to advertise. You go back to what is the purpose of this national broadcaster. I believe there is one. I think Radio Canada and CBC Radio are better at doing it than the television arm. But it's a fundamental thing of, you are funded by the state. You are demonstrably opposed to the Conservatives. For heaven's sakes, in the last election, they sued them. They sued the Conservative Party for what's called fair usage in our business, which is that you can take a little clip. If I'm doing a column by you and you're at another media organization, I can take a few paragraphs of what you said and put it into my line, as long as I identify that you were the source and your organization. That's what the Conservatives did. They sued them. They lost. Everybody knew they would lose. They put their reporters on the statement of claim, which was a disaster for those reporters. And so really with the CBC, it's not about, not how much money they get. What is their goal? What is their purpose? What is their mandate? Because today it's far away from what it was years ago when everybody got the CBC. It was the national broadcaster. It did things that other news outlets wouldn't. They broadcast to places where they couldn't make money because those people needed communication. All those things are legitimate. But what it's become, this kind of soft left thing that runs American programming half the time. What's going on there?
Well, the National Post carried a piece about 10 days ago by a woman who had worked for the CBC and quit in disgust, because she said, among other things, one of the best examples she gave was that the CBC wrestled with these stories about why in the Philippines, in the native language in the Philippines, there aren't enough words for LGBTQ, but they gloss over inflation in Canada. Like they're so woke, and their priorities are so misplaced. It doesn't surprise me at all. And there's two things about this story about giving the CBC 400 million more. So that would be about 1.7 or 1.8 billion a year of taxpayer dollars. Two things about this bother me. First of all, at any given time, in prime time, during weeknight, the CBC has 5% of Canadians watching. Now that is less than are tuned in to streaming services that we all have to pay for on our own. Netflix, Prime, DAZN, all Disney Plus, all of those which we have to spend $14, $15, $20 a month on. And yet the people who love the niche programming of the CBC, the woke comedies and the biased documentaries, they get all that paid for by the rest of us. And that bothers me. And the other thing is exactly what you said, and that is that the CBC does not understand anybody but woke, progressive, liberal Canadians. And they're actually pretty good at times between elections going after the government. That was CBC that raised the blackface issue, for instance. And the CBC will go after some of Trudeau's scandals, but the instant the writs are dropped, the CBC becomes an in-house media organization for the Liberal Party of Canada. And they spend their entire campaign, they spend all the coverage of the campaign trying to discredit anybody who's a threat to the Liberals. They'll go after, if the NDP start to rise up again, they'll go after them. If the Conservatives, who've been the biggest threat to the Liberals the last 2 or 3 elections, they go after them. And they don't focus on anything that Trudeau is or isn't saying. They don't bring up the fact that, yes, he's making huge promises again, but how many promises has he ever kept? It's just ridiculous. And they lose all of their objectivity, if they have any left, during campaigns. And they circle the wagons around Trudeau or whoever's the Liberal leader at the time, and for 30 to 70 days, that's all they do.
There's one thing you're absolutely right. There's one thing I'd like to add. One of the goals of a national broadcaster should be to help Canadians understand each other across the country and to unify the country. And you know this case, the CBC demonstrably attacks Alberta. The poll they did, where they only talked about Alberta, only less than half of Canadians would be comfortable moving to Alberta, left out the rest of the country when they were shamed to actually reporting on every province. There was another poll. What did we find out? Number one, that the number of people who are comfortable living in Alberta were exactly the same as the number of people who are comfortable moving to Ontario, that Alberta was in the top third of the preferences of Canadians, and twice as popular as Quebec. Not a knock on Quebec, that's obviously language. But it's the mindset where you would start out by trying to humiliate Albertans by only talking about people that would move there. And no one in the story meetings goes, wait a minute, we can't just do that. We have to do the rest. And in terms of wokeness, what does it waste its time and our money on that we shouldn't use words like grandfathered in or lame? What is wrong with these people? And so all those are basically, to me, all come under the one rubric. What is the purpose of this national broadcaster? We see in Ontario, we have TV Ontario, the British public broadcaster. The Americans have a very good public broadcasting network. What are they doing right that the CBC and the government are doing wrong?
Well, this comes, I think, from budgeting. The CBC relies almost entirely on taxpayer money to keep going, and it's ad revenues. They talk about they have $400 million in ad revenues. They haven't had $400 million in ad revenues since in the last 7 years. Last year it was $199 million. So it's already a distortion to say they need 400 to replace their ad revenues when their ad revenues are under 200. But they rely for most of their money on government, whereas PBS, for instance, relies on governments of one level or another for only about 8% of its budget. So let's say to the CBC, hey, you can have the same percentage of your budget from the public taxpayer that PBS gets, and then we'll just go from there.
We're always interested in hearing your views. Do you agree with Lorne and me in a rather critical perspective of the CBC, or do you find something that's worthy there that we can't find? Anyway, please follow us on Facebook and Twitter and subscribe to our YouTube channel.